greatest strength. Our greatest strength about being Indian is our communities, is that tribal emotion. I remember talking to a lady in San Juan County about the placement program, and I was asking her about it, and she was the one that explained this to me, the attack on the Indian families. Is how devastating is that when somebody comes into your house, those with children, they come into your house and say, you're not doing a very good job with your kids. I can do a better job with your kids. Come, have them live with me, and they'll come live out in Fort Duchesne, and they'll go to the best schools, and they'll have a real good opportunity at life. And so, how devastating is that? And she was telling me from the perspective as a mother whose children were involved with the placement program. At its high point, we had 5,000 kids that were in the placement program. 25 to 35% of Indian children are removed from their families. Attack on culture, language, you can see this gap. You can see this gap, and in my work that I do to this day, actually, you can see this culture of the expectation that most likely your kids are not going to be raised by you throughout their 0 through 18. You know, I think about my 2 kids right here down here. It's devastating to me to think about them being raised by somebody else. You know, so sometimes that's the culture of the family. It's like, oh, of course, Grandma was raised by somebody else. I was raised by somebody else, and of course my kids will be raised by somebody else.
This ACE study looked at 7 points, and the first 3 were about things that happened to the individual. So you can just, if you would like, for your own self, take this test yourself. You can get the highest score is 7, and the lowest score is 1. It's pretty simple. So the number 1 thing is recurrent physical abuse that has happened to you. This is really hard stuff to talk about, so don't be surprised if I cry. Number 2, recurrent severe emotional abuse. Number 3, contact sexual abuse. And then the last 4 deal with environmental scenarios. Number 4, growing up in a household where someone was in prison. Number 5, where the mother was treated violently. Number 6, there's an alcoholic or drug user in the home. Number 7, where someone was chronically depressed or mentally ill or suicidal. The building upon effect. The more adverse childhood experiences you've endured as a child, more likely you'll have social, emotional, cognitive impairments. The more likely you will adopt high-risk behaviors in your life. And as a result, your body will succumb to disease, disability, social problems, the idea of an earlier death. And so that's pretty traumatic. It was so interesting, we watched a YouTube clip on this the other day, and I believe it was a medical doctor that was explaining this because he had a healthy young woman come into his office, or into the doctor's office to be checked up upon, and she reported that she was sexually assaulted and raped. And she was a healthy young girl, and as years went on, the doctor noted the quick decline of her mental health, of her physical health, and depression set in for this woman. And so it kind of can tell you the idea of, I told you I was going to cry, I told Sheldon I would cry. The effects of what trauma can do to one individual, and that was a one incident. Or people were trying to find out, why are these infants dying inside of these orphanages? And they went in and checked to see what was going on, and they were being fed. They were receiving shelter. They received the sleep that they need. But what they found was the emotional, social neglect of these kids began to shut their brains down. Sorry, I don't think I can do this, Sheldon. I'm going to stick with special education. But this is so important to know, that when you neglect a child, you look at the different sizes of these brains. The white matter is what we want, the big, full white matter where things are flowing and neurons are firing. But when we neglect, we see a decrease in the brain, and the child begins to shut down. I'm so sorry. What do childs need for development? I love this book. A guy named David Rico put out. But this keeps it simple so that we can all be simple with this, and so that we can think about what kids need, what our families need, what our communities need. And it's simple as the 5 A's. Attention. Everyone needs someone who's crazy about them. It feeds our soul, it feeds our minds. Affection. Touch releases dopamine, a calming effect. Appreciation gives them a purpose. Acceptance. You feel okay. You feel like you're worth something. Allowance. You're free to become yourself. That's powerful. And this is something else that I always like to reiterate when I give my presentations or I talk with parents when we're working with a child with a disability. The most important thing is to get at their level and take it at the child's pace. Do things with the child, not for them. Know their likes and dislikes. Know what makes them tick. More recently, that our interactions, emotional abuse, physical abuse, whatever it may be, alters the brain chemistry. And you will see more of that, I guarantee it, because I think that's a new way of research. It's coming out in special education, and I can imagine you guys might have heard it in social justice issues or child abuse or whatnot. So watch for that. So, like I just said, like a flower, our interactions with each other, and more importantly, our children, feeds the brain to either make it bloom or wilt.
Floyd became the director of social services, and he's telling me that approximately 150 kids were in state of Utah DCFS custody. They had a unique situation out there where even though juvenile court, the youth juvenile court had jurisdiction, they would transfer custody out to state services. And so all our kids ended up being all over the state, from Logan all the way down to Cedar City at some points in this whole process. But today, as of August, as of Court Tuesday, we have 4 children left in DCFS custody. Total amount of kids that are in tribal custody is actually about half of what 150 is. And that's the trend generally in the whole United States, is that there's less foster placements throughout the whole state of Utah. I'm sure their numbers are way down from 10 years ago as well. And so we're about half of that. Another success out there is that nearly 75% of our placements are kinship placements on or near the reservation. Is that families are stepping up. Families are saying, oh, that's nephew. You know, that's my family. Come live with me. I want you in my home. That was the whole presentation. I'm getting emotional. I remember there's an old man right here, sitting right here the whole time. I'm talking to the crowd with the old man sitting right here. And he's showing no emotion the whole time. You know, I'm up there bumbling around. And I finished. I said, all right, is there any questions? And no one raises their hand. And this old man, he sits there, and I didn't even think he was paying attention half the time. You know, he raises his hand. And he says, I have a question. I have something to say. You know, 6 of those 7 things happened to me. I grew up in a community where 6 of those things happened to me, and I don't want that to happen to these children that are out here. I'm taking a stand today. I'm standing here today saying that that's not going to happen to my children. In the Northern Cheyenne culture, there's this notion of being a dog soldier. I tell that to my son actually all the time, be a dog soldier. But this notion of being a dog soldier, what it means is, and you'd see these dog soldiers, they would go around with these tethers on their belt. There'd be a stick hanging down from a rope on their belt. And that's a commitment that you're making. That's a covenant you're making to your people. And if I can implore you to be a horned toad in some way, it could be this, you know, to capture your imagination of being a dog soldier as well, is that whenever there'd be a fight, whenever the tribe would be attacked, or whenever their family would be attacked, that was a commitment that they're going to stick that into the ground and fight to the very end. I'm not leaving. I'm sticking here. I'm going to die here if that needs to be. And so I ask you guys, implore you guys to make that same commitment.